My career sucks.
Sex just isn't the same.
What's my purpose?
Where did this fat come from?
My relationship is killing me.
I'll never be happy.
My debt is piling up. I'll never find love. Why can't I be like other gay guys? Hey guys, it's time to get a grip, stop whining, make a bold move, and do something amazing with your 40-plus gay life. Let's get to the show with your Tell It Like It Is host, Rick Clemons, who does his best to never act like a dick or a diva unless you act like one first.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of 40 Plus Gay Men Gay Talk. And we are kicking off Pride season a couple of weeks early this year. Yay! Because I think we need to. I think Pride is something we really need to focus on this year. Whether you're going to go to a Pride festival or not, that isn't what it's all about per se. But there's a lot of energy around LGBTQIA plus people in the world these days. And just a lot of us feeling pulled apart, not sure where we stand. Are we safe? Are we not safe? So number one, be out there, be safe as you're out there. Kind of watch your backs this year. We're going to hope and, put all the rainbow fairies out there that we're all going to do very well. Stay protected in what we're doing. And to that realm, I really wanted to have somebody to help me kick off Pride season this year that looks at it through a different lens, as an advocate, happens to be a drag queen, also is a social worker, does some really good stuff in supporting our queer community through therapy, and really helping individuals just embrace who they truly are in the world. His name is Will Dempsey, and I am so glad that he is joining us. He is one of the founders of Heads Held High Counseling, a therapy group that operates in Massachusetts and Illinois. And I'm just excited to have this conversation with kind of a fellow sojourner, like, hey, how can we be ready for Pride, enjoy it, but also how can we work through some of the mental health that all of us are dealing with in some way, shape, or form. So Will, welcome to the podcast, man. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and happy Pride, man. Happy Pride. So here we go.
Right.
Rocking in. So what was kind of the driver for you? Like, I'm going to go do this social work stuff. I really want to support my own community. What was something that brought you to this work, man? Always curious about that.
Yeah, I think very early on, I had a friend who was having a really hard time and having some thoughts about wanting to end their life when we were in high school. And I ended up going to some sessions with this individual. They were not comfortable to go to therapy on their own. They were kind of scared about the process, as many people are. And so seeing how transformative simply talking to someone, not to oversimplify what therapy is, but how simply talking to someone could really transform their life and literally save this person's life, started to inspire me. And then as I moved through college and had to try to figure out what the hell am I going to do with my life? Because at 18, most of us don't really know.
I did. I knew it. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, great. My dad did too.
I wish, man. What I'm doing now is the furthest from what I did in college. Trust me. So
I certainly had no idea I was going to do drag at 18, but yeah, so I figured, I really love helping people. And I was reflecting on this transformative experience just a couple years prior, and I said, let's give it a try. And kind of the rest is history.
And I'm sure just being there with your friend was probably not only good for you, but really helpful for them as well, because therapy can be kind of intimidating. What's wrong with me? Am I one of those that now I'm going to become, oh, so you have a therapist, you must be really screwed up. That's not the way it is at all. I mean, you're right. I think the conversation piece is key for most people. Like, just here's a container that you can talk and really feel safe for many people.
Yeah. And I think especially based on cultural background, what age range you're a part of, there's still often a lot of stigma with mental health that we're overcoming societally. I think we've made a lot of great headway nationally, but there still is a lot of reasons why people are hesitant and why there might be some judgment or even stigma, whether internal or external, about it. So certainly I would agree that there's a lot of valid reasons why someone would be hesitant or intimidated to make an initial point of contact.
So what is some of the hesitancy for some people? I mean, is it the stigma a lot of times that's like, oh, I shouldn't, is that what holds people back? Or is it the confusion? What is the thing? Because mental health is really a hot button right now. Let's just be honest, right? So what is some of the stuff that you see holds people back from stepping into doing the work and getting the support?
Yeah, I think part of it is definitely the stigma. I think part of it is, people, as you talked to a little bit, like assuming that they should have the answers, that they should be able to figure it out. I think some people that this is not really as common nowadays, are not really sure how it's going to help them. How is talking to someone going to help me figure out my problems? I have friends and family for that. What are you going to do that's different?
Right.
And I think the biggest thing that we talk a lot about, which is why I created this practice in Massachusetts, is access. A lot of providers, and I won't get on a whole soapbox about this, but are no longer taking insurance because of, frankly, low reimbursement rates from insurance. But what's happening now is it's causing a lot of stress on access to affordable care. And so people who don't have financial access, especially in our community, a lot of people don't have that financial access to afford $200 an hour. You'll see a lot of in Boston.
Yep.
So it makes it really difficult for people to afford $800 a month just to get that support.
Yep.
So depending on the area, I would say access is a really big thing that we're seeing increasingly to be a challenge, both for the provider and for the client, as we're having a national economic challenge.
Well, and it's not only a national economic challenge, but there's a national epidemic in mental health right now. I have seen it more and more in people in my own world that just are finally saying, I feel like I'm struggling. And it's the first time they probably have ever said those words, because there is the stigma, or, oh, what's somebody going to think of me? And I went through it myself. I thought, okay, coming out, that was one piece of the puzzle. But I used to, and I hate to even admit that I used to do this, but I bashed my own mother and my ex-wife for like, oh, come on, you can't be depressed. This is not really, just do this and just do that. Until I had it hit me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a steamroller when it hits. And I now embrace that this is part of my DNA. I work really hard when it happens to like go, oh gosh, you got to get out of it. No, I just hold it, embrace it. I admit it. I tell my husband like, hey, I'm feeling my depression coming on. It never takes me completely down, but I am more than willing to go, okay, I'm just going to go chill. I'm just going to let me just go be in this, because I know that's one of the ways I work through it. I do have a therapist available to me when I feel like I want that. I felt really good for the most part over the last few years. But there are moments that I'm like, yep, I need that space. And somebody will say to me, well, can't you just talk to your husband? Of course I can talk to my husband. But there's something different about being able to really go in deeper with someone who is trained in this arena. It's kind of like, people say to me as a coach, like, well, what is the people are going to get from you that they can't get from somebody else? I'm like, you can get candid conversation maybe with a good friend, but are they going to really help you like see something you can't see? Are they going to really not just say what you want to hear? Are they going to challenge you to look at it through another lens? Are they going to be empathetic in a way that's different than just being empathetic as a friend? And I think these are the things that are the beauty of the modalities you and I get to work in, is that support. So here we are at Pride, a lot of uncertainty going on right now in our world. What are some of the most common things that you feel like as a, person in this modality are seeing crop up in your practice quite a bit right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one, of course, is political anxiety. That's been going on for a long time, a number of years, and especially with a lot of the rhetoric that is attacking trans folks and the queer population in general, but especially trans folks. People are scared. People are concerned about what's going to come down the pike. A lot of even cis people are worried about marriage equality. A lot of things are really centering around, I think, politics right now, as well as, and tied to that, of course, is healthcare access again, not as from what I mentioned earlier, but for trans healthcare specifically.
Yep.
And I would say those tend to be kind of the major focal points of the last couple of months.
It's really interesting that you bring up the marriage equality and the healthcare piece, because I I've had a few conversations with some people in my world who are like, they're not coming for marriage equality. I'm like, you don't know that. You're not living and breathing this. We've been down this path, and they like to stand in that, oh no, that, the Republicans, they aren't coming for that. They love the gays. I'm like, no, you can't be doing some of what we're seeing here and saying we're not immune from this. Also, the whole piece of the healthcare piece. And I'm a guy who's had some health scares over the last couple of years. And I was in the ER a couple of nights ago, not for anything super significant, but I was sitting there with my husband and I couldn't help but sit there and think, Will, I remember when him sitting there with me would have done no good whatsoever.
Yeah.
He could have come to the lobby with me, but beyond that, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And when I have those moments, and the other night I was a little shook up and like, what would it be like if I couldn't have him with me right now? Sure, I could text him or whatever, but it's not the same as having that person right there by your side. And I have straight friends who are like, what do you mean he couldn't go with you? I'm like, no, if it's not a family member, no access, period. And I think these are the things that are starting to, probably percolate more is a better way. Like it's always kind of been there over the last few years, but I think we're now seeing, here we go. And I see a lot of anxiety happening in our community, even if a lot of it is centric to trans right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think anybody in our community who's eyes wide open, let's just say it that way, I think we all feel like we're one step away. We're just one step away. Yeah. So how are you helping some of your, beautiful, patients who come in start to navigate some of this anxiety and, overwhelm?
Yeah, I think that moving through anxiety, regardless of what the topic is something that is going to look the same. And that is first and foremost, reminding yourself that anxiety lives and breathes in the what ifs. Mm-hmm. And so grounding yourself in what is happening versus what could happen is what helps to regulate our nervous system, which is what is fueled with our anxiety. So there's a very careful line that we have to walk here where we're not ignoring the possibility, but we're not getting lost in it. So what I try to encourage folks is that there's a nice balance between not putting your head in the sand and saying, well, marriage equality is never going to get overturned, but also not literally losing sleep, doom scrolling, or putting yourself into panic attacks, or having these more high levels of reaction to something that we still have a couple of steps away. And as you said, we are feeling that 1 degree of separation, but that there's a couple of things that have to happen first before we really want to warrant that level of concern. Grounding yourself in that. Another thing is by getting activated, getting involved, whether that's protests, donating, volunteering to communities that you're concerned about if it's not directly impacting yours. There are a lot of things that you could be doing, even things that are not tied to what you're worried about. Proper self-care, going to therapy, having yoga, going on a run, things that are going to impact your endorphins to keep you moving, get you out of the house. Because a lot of times anxiety and depression can be crippling, sometimes quite literally, but allowing to take hold is going to keep us in that cycle that we want to try to break.
It's interesting. There was another online group that I belong to, and a guy posted the other day, like, I'm really struggling like with some of the best ways to do self-care for myself right now. Any suggestions? Now, that was a pretty big, wide open question, right? There wasn't enough detail. So you as a counselor and me as a coach, I'd be like, well, can you give me a little more specifics here? Like, what is something that you feel like isn't self-care that you're not giving yourself, or define what self-care would look like for it? So, okay, so y'all are getting live. You're getting live coaching here, right here on this podcast. But I found it really interesting, some of the responses, because you could tell even in some of the responses, and, I love that all these people were sharing, people were really coming only from the surface element, well, just go take a nice walk. Okay. That's a great, make time for a walk. One guy said, well, make sure you floss your teeth. I'm like, okay, I don't know that that's where he was going, but and I think what the guy was really meaning is like more like, what are the little things that you may, and then of course, as soon as the one guy said that about the flossing teeth, the next guy said, oh yeah, when I get really depressed, I don't take a bath or shower or brush my teeth or anything for days on end. And of course, somebody had to smart off, the typical online world, right? And say, that's just really gross. I can't imagine you doing that. I'm like, yes, because you maybe have never been depressed,
Right.
to the point of what's the point? What's the purpose, even in brushing your teeth, flossing your teeth, taking a shower? And I think this is kind of where we're sitting on some edges again. I mean, we always sit on the edges, but I think we're kind of sitting on some precipices right now where we are in a volatile space as humanity, especially here in the US, and in the LGBTQ plus community, where there's so much unknown. And I love what you said about don't let yourself get lost in this. Be aware, but how can you implement ways to not go into the rabbit hole, so to speak? And I think that's where, as a counselor, one of the greatest gifts you can give someone is nudging them to step back from the edge of the cliff, nudging them back from the rabbit hole, nudging them back from, okay, just bury my head in the sand and let's just pretend. It's got to be really challenging and rewarding to help somebody through that, I would think.
I would say so. And I think really what we're starting to talk about now is connection and community. And what I really liked that we were talking about earlier is about stigma of mental health care. What I tell clients a lot is how beautiful it would be if all of us started to have conversation around how, if I'm not going to you because I feel like I'm going to be a burden on you, or that you're going to judge me for my mental health and you're thinking the same thing, so we're not talking to each other about our struggles, if we let that wall down and realize we're both having the same thoughts, how we could then open up to each other and start to have community and connection. I think that this is an opportunity for the community, which if we all know we're struggling, we're not going to have as much worry about being told, well, that's gross and disgusting that you're having a depressive episode, because we know that we're experiencing similar experiences right now. And so I would encourage people to lean on folks from the community. And if you don't have access, go on Reddit, I try to avoid social media in general, especially when we're talking about doom scrolling and taking care of your mental health. Finding a forum or some way that you can connect with someone from the community and start to build connection in that way. Another great idea is, besides getting off social media, to stay informed, what I often encourage people is there someone in your life that you can have to essentially dilute down the news? So you're not going on and having to read these articles, but having someone who you trust who's going to tell you what you think is important to know. Maybe it's global politics and not domestic right now, if that's not feeling like something you can handle. Someone who has, as we often say in the field, the spoons or the space to handle that. But again, I think right now, this is the time where we really need to lean on community more than ever. And of course, pride is the perfect conversation to be talking about that.
And realizing that, and this came from Will, some email exchanges Will and I were having, that, pride really began out of protest. I think the younger generation doesn't, I'm going to say this in a generalization, not meaning to offend anybody, but I think sometimes they don't realize this wasn't always just, it's this big celebration sort of thing. It came out of protest, out of Stonewall, all of this sort of stuff. And so ironic and yet somewhat beautiful that here we are back in that space of protest. And I'm hoping nothing but the best for, quote, Pride season this year, that, everything goes as it should. And, even with all the rhetoric and the, quote, corporate sponsors pulling out and all this, then let's band together as community. Let's come back to what it was really all about to begin with. Not that what we've had was bad, but maybe we're being called. Maybe we're being called in a very conscious way right now as a queer community to go, let's get back to the basics and let's start to really, truly support each other. Because I know even in the guys that show up for my monthly men's chats, there is this sense of camaraderie. And at least I have this. I can come to this and feel like I'm part of something. A few months ago, I was involved in a gay men's erotic retreat. And the facilitator did something very beautiful. And guys who've listened have heard this a little bit, but I'm not going to go deep into it. But one of the things, the agreements we had coming into it is if you felt compelled during any of the discussions or any of the experiences we were having that this was somebody says something and you're like, oh, wow, yeah, that's me, to just say, just like me, or me too.
Yeah.
And it was really empowering, Will, to start to hear the little mumblings of that. And then, a day into this whole thing, there was a lot more, oh, just like me, because we all think we're operating in a vacuum by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But when we really start to connect in community, we start to find ourselves, we realize we are not alone. We are not alone in any way, shape, or form, even though it may feel like it. As somebody who's out there, and I know you said you really like to be an advocate in the queer rights and stuff, how do you guide someone who's like, I want to be more involved, but I'm not sure let's be on the protest line, or I'm not sure I want to, be seen in a, social media post as being part of that? How do you help guide them to feel part of it, yet they don't have to be right in the thick of it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great ways that people can still be involved without being public or on the front line. One of which is talking to talking to people who are currently in political seats to advocate for communities that are struggling right now, and encourage that they are going to have legislation that's going to support those communities. That's a great way to be an ally. To be communicating even just to friends and family about the importance of this, like you talked about earlier, that educating even as simple as a straight person about, hey, if things keep on this path, my partner doesn't have rights to be in the same room as me when I'm in the ER. A lot of people simply are not intending to be harmful, but just aren't educated. So providing that education can go a really long way. And there's always opportunities for volunteering, whether monetarily or time, that doesn't have to be politically activated, that's still supporting marginalized communities, which can be so essential right now.
Mm-hmm.
And even just educating yourself. I mean, there's a lot of education that can be done for people on a solo basis about ways that they can get involved. But I think, again, right now, the main thing is really just finding ways to connect to community. And I think really that is, I think that's what we need right now.
Do you find in this connection piece, because this comes up a lot in my practice, I'd really like to connect, but even in our own community, creating those connections is really hard. Do you hear a lot of that these days?
I do. I think that there's a stigma and some reality to it that the community can be sexual, and so there's a difficulty to have platonic relationship. I think there's also, depending on area, access challenges, right? If you're in a more rural community, you're not going to have access as much as you will in a city. And also, I interned at Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York. I worked at Fenway Health in Boston. So like a lot of, among other organizations that started in the 80s. And a lot of older gay men specifically have lost a lot of community because of the epidemic that we experienced in the 80s and 90s. And so practically having access in that way also makes it challenging for folks to build community. And this is where what we talked about earlier is really interesting, to watch younger generations grow up where they have access to social media and they've had access to a lot more privilege and acceptance in school that even I didn't have. And I'm not that much older than the generations I'm thinking of. Things are changing very quickly. But certainly for those reasons about where you live and how old you are, there's often a challenge for access, and it definitely comes up in conversation often.
And I think that's a key piece of it, is to realize sometimes the best way you can be an advocate is to just have a conversation. Help me understand. Show me what I don't get. Back to what you just said about somebody who may be an ally or, a heteronormative cisgendered person. They may not realize there was times that, for two men to like rent a apartment together, that was never going to happen. I remember years ago when my husband had an accident, before we were married. It was not pretty. When I took him to the ER, he looked like he'd been beaten up. I'm a big guy, and I remember, even though we were domestic partners and I had all the proof of it, there was a lot of shade getting thrown my way. And like, who is this? Was this a, was this like, there was no rape thing, but it could have on the surface looked that way, right? And just my ability to be there to tell the story helped tremendously. But to be sitting on the other side of that, feeling those like looks and like what's gone on here, all that sort of stuff, it's not comfortable, And sometimes I think I told a acquaintance, well, a friend of mine, like, yeah, there were times where if two men wanted to rent that apartment, somebody could discriminate against them, like, no, no, oh, you're gay, no, not going to happen. I believe it still does. I still think there's a lot of places that can still happen. But with this rhetoric and the way things are going, that could become a reality all over again. And I don't know that the common people who chose certain ideologies, let's just go that way, realized this is what they put into play. And they don't realize how what they did is actually hurting people right now for whatever reasons, most of them being like, okay, we're going to save abortion. Fine. But do you realize when you did that, you did a whole lot of other stuff that started this whole crazy, not even just trickle down, this tsunami of craziness that we're now experiencing. So how do you personally keep yourself in this really, I'm going to say positive, stay focused sort of way? What are some of your own personal techniques for keeping your mental health in check?
Yeah.
Other than getting dressed up in drag and going, okay, now I'm fabulous.
And that certainly is a part of it because I'm I guess privileged in a way that drag in itself is rooted in such political advocacy that I use that as an outlet to educate others, to call for allyship, and to even raise money for important queer organizations. I donate most of my tips usually to queer organizations, because I'm privileged with my money from my full-time practice. But aside from that, I work out 3 times a week. Exercise is a great way to impact the endorphins that combat things like depression and anxiety. I am privileged in living in Chicago where I have access to a very big queer community. So I have a lot of support from friends in that way, to reach on and call out to when I need it. It's also a very community-minded city. It's very queer, kind of grassroots, I would say, in my experience. So just even being in the energy, you kind of pick that up, and that helps for me for self-care. And when needed, I've opted for medication in the past. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't currently take medication, but that's something that a lot of folks increasingly since the 80s have started to do. And that's a great way to manage your mental health if that works for your brain. As you said, it's part of neuropsychology. It's not simply just get over it. And when I need it, other things like meditation or somatic practices, I've started to get into a little bit more. But therapy honestly has been the biggest outlet for me. I've been in therapy for on and off for over 10 years. And it quite literally saved my life at one point. So I very much am a believer, not only as a therapist, but as a client, in the power of therapy.
I agree. So one of the things that comes up a lot in my world is, because I coach men midlife, coming out, moving through midlife stuff as gay men, is this, okay, it's great. Will just said he lives in, Chicago. He's got all the community, blah, 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 blah. I live in this little teeny tiny town. I'm probably the one gay person in 500 miles. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but sometimes no, that could be really, at least from their perception. What's some advice you give that person who feels the isolation of being somewhat isolated? How would you work with them? Because I've got some ideas, and I'd love to see how the two of us would approach this. And because I get this all the time, just all the time it comes up.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ideas that I have is, again, trying to connect to people via social media. You have access to the world. And there are a lot of other queer people who are also in your situation, maybe not in the exact same area, but who are also seeking community. And so there are resources to access that community and to connect with people. That really is the big one that comes to mind.
Yep.
And I think the other thing is to try to see and reframe the way that you think about the community that you do have. And while I recognize that there are going to be inherent limitations of not having community of shared identity, a conversation I often have with my clients is remembering that one shared identity is not all shared identities, or even that me also being a gay man doesn't mean that my experience as a gay man is the same as yours. And so, for a client who reaches out to me because I'm a gay male therapist, that's the first thing I'll say is, what is your expectation of that from me? Because how I've grown up as a gay man is not how you've grown up as a gay man, is not how someone else has. And so let's try to understand how I can bridge the gap and the parts I can't, how that's going to impact our work. So, all of that to say that there are ways that people who feel more isolated from the community can connect with other people who may not be part of the community on shared themes. Maybe they're also feeling lonely because they don't have a community of people shared identities, even though it's different from the person I'm helping.
Yep.
And so you can connect over the loneliness, and while it's different inherently, you can still figure out how to move through it together, or build a new community in addressing that loneliness, right? There's a couple different, I think a big thing that I talk about with my clients, just as a general whole and working through anything, is reframing your perspective and how that can be really transformative to overcoming some of those feelings that we're trying to get rid of.
I really like that concept of the shared identity because I went through that a lot when I first came out. And part of the reason I went into this work as a coach, working with men in midlife coming out, was because I started having these guys say, oh, well, I'm just like you. I am married. I have children. Tell me how you did this. Tell me what to do. And I'm like, well, I could tell you what I did, but that doesn't mean that's necessarily going to work for you, because we're not exactly the same person. We do have a shared identity of a gay man who was married in a heterosexual relationship, and we're fathers. Okay. So there's a lot of shared identity there. But I don't know your values. I don't know your belief systems. I don't know, what turns you on, what doesn't turn you on. So there's lots of different ways to navigate these things. And I think the beauty of when you start to realize you can have the shared identity with someone who's out there in the world, but don't try to make that your shared experience, because you might get really disappointed. Well, this is what they did. That didn't work for me. Oh, I thought that was going to work for me. Mm-hmm. No, I want you to have your own experience on what it means for you to come out. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to start to embrace. There's a lot of intersectionality in our shared identities. Mm-hmm. But as soon as we hold that shared identity hostage to create our identity, we actually are probably hurting ourselves. Use it where it makes the most sense, but also give room for this beautiful way that you now embrace. One of my favorite things to say, Will, is I want you to continue to come out of the closet and be out of the closet in a way that works for you. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no one right way. I love my clients that come in like, so are you going to give me the handbook on how to do this? I'm like, nope. I'm going to share with you some things that helped, but I want you to write your own handbook. Mm-hmm. Because I was a guy who was already having lots of sex before I even came out. I didn't feel the need after I came out to continue going having lots of wild, crazy sex. I was more on relationship mode. So I had already kind of done the kid in the candy store thing. A lot of you that are going to come out, you haven't even done that yet. That doesn't mean you have to go become the kid in the candy store, but sometimes that's how you're going to figure those things out. And I love that shared identity piece is really huge, because I think oftentimes people will lean into, well, I'm in this little tiny town, so there's not a gay bar, there's not this, there's not that. The only thing I have in common with you is I'm a gay guy, you're a gay guy, and that's where it ends. But the reframing of the perspective is always something that can truly, truly drive you forward. I also love inviting people to go, well, I know it's not the perfect thing, but plan some getaways. Go dip your toe in the gay world, whatever that looks like for you. And for some of them, I actually was just working with a potential client this past week. Very tough one, so to speak. And he was very stuck in, yes, but because I do this, there's just, I just can't mate other gay men. And he was very caught in a masculine construct of why.
Yeah.
And then I said to him, you know what? I'm going to challenge you to go seek out and see where there may be these other gay men who really like outdoor adventure sports and, doing these risky, more, not that I consider white water rafting super risky, but that's kind of his world. He loves the extremes. I said, there's a lot of gay men who love playing in those kinds of extremes. You just haven't found them yet. And I think this is where, when you can embrace that sort of stuff, your own mental health rises, because now there are people just like me doing this sort of stuff. So as we go through Pride season, I know we kind of touched on this a little bit. What would be something you would invite people coming from mental health, kind of more of a quote protest sort of space? What would you invite each person to kind of be in their own way in Pride this year?
Proud. I think that, to circle back to what I said earlier about not putting your head in the sand, but not dwelling over everything, there is a balance between remembering the roots of Pride, but still having fun. Pride doesn't have to be this heavy thing, but you can also still recognize that there's work to be done and not get lost in the celebration. And I think this is where there's kind of beauty, and a lot of what I've experienced personally, friends have as well, is having conversations with queer elders and remembering where we've come from and how much progress has been made, even in just a decade of any given decade. A decade prior was astronomically different for the queer community than where it is in that day. While also remembering, let's celebrate the progress that we have made, and not getting lost in there's more progress to be done, because regardless of what community we're talking about, there's always going to be more progress to be made. Even within ourselves, I talk about this in therapy, there's always going to be more progress to be made, because perfection doesn't exist. And so at a certain point, you have to celebrate the progress you've made to tie in the experience of therapy with that, and not get so lost in, well, I'm not here yet, I'm not good enough yet. What is good enough, right? And I think it gets a little bit different when we're talking about rights, of course.
Sure.
But this is an interesting thing that's also been coming up a lot in conversation, because, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, or maybe not, World Pride is happening this year in DC.
Yep.
And the city is selected years in advance. This was not planned. And I've already seen a lot of conversation around a call, usually from older people in the community, saying we really need to protest and forget corporations and stop celebrating, and younger people being like, we're exhausted from fighting and we just want to have this for us.
I want to have fun.
And it's a big generalization, of course, of age,
Sure.
but from what I've been seeing. But I'm very curious to see kind of where things are going to fall over the weekend. How much of it is going to be just how much of it is going to be celebration. So again, I think there's a possibility for both. And I think it's really important to hold both going into Pride Month and even afterwards.
Well, I think the conversation piece is such a beautiful thing. We've been having conversations with friends. I have some friends that are going to go, and it's ranged from, are you really feeling comfortable going, to why wouldn't I go? This is one of the greatest opportunities to stand in the face of, all of this. Other conversation, I was having a conversation with a young guy who was just like, he was so excited. I'm getting on prep. I'm like, good for you, man. Good for you. And he goes, but just having to get tested all the time. I said, can I just tell you a story about testing? He goes, yeah. I said, I come from an era where when we got tested, you went in a room, you were given a number, they called your number, and you sat there and you waited until they called your number to go find out if you were HIV negative or positive. There were no names exchanged. There was none of this. And you waited for 2 weeks. You literally had to wait. I said, be proud that you get to have access to PrEP, that once a quarter, whatever, once a quarter is what I get tested, that's what it's going to take to stay on it. I said, I'm not saying you got it so lucky. I will never say that, even though I kind of want to. But I'm like, and he's like, I did not know any of that. And I said, this is why it's so important to have these conversations, not to say, see what we did for y'all. No, that's not the point. It's like, understand where we came from. My uncle was gay in the 70s. I learned so much from him and his passing from AIDS and all that. that set my tone for how I chose to end up being as a gay man out in the world. And oftentimes we don't have these beautiful conversations. I love that you said, Will, these conversations with the elders, and that's no diminishing. That's no diminishing the age of someone. There are people who survived the AIDS epidemic, who lost hundreds of friends. And what you can do by having a conversation with one of them can enrich your life like you will never, ever imagine. And I think this is the point of what we've been trying to share here today is share your mental health struggles, share your perspectives, share your fears, but also celebrate where we've come, what you've accomplished, and what you've done, because that's what pride is really, truly all about. You just kind of light up the room, man. I love how you bring a perspective here. What's one of the things you're most proud of in all the stuff that you've done, from doing drag to the social work to being an advocate? What's something like you go, I'm so proud of me, Will, for this?
That's a really great question.
You can say your hair. You got great hair. So if you want.
I appreciate that. I think this is always a challenging question to answer. And I do have an answer for you, but I just want to acknowledge for anyone else out there who feels like I do in this moment, there's a difficulty in feeling humility while also feeling proud. And I always think that's something I find interesting when reflecting on Pride Month. And there's a whole litany of reasons why as humans we struggle with that, and queer folks, and I can get into like especially religious trauma, but that's a whole nother podcast episode. I would say my practice, honestly, to have cultivated a space where right now I have a team of 10, we're going up to 15 by the end of the summer, of all LGBTQ identified therapists across 2 states supporting queer and trans folks, to provide insurance-based mental health care, which right now access to care, as we talked about, is such a challenge.
Yep.
I've really been privileged with that, and in the grand scheme of it, I'm not that old. I haven't been in the career that long, and I've had a lot of experiences, even in grad school, where one of my professors said, "You'll never be a good therapist. You should go into like macro social work." In a way, I have, but I reflect on that experience a lot, especially when I have clients say how transformative our sessions have made their experience. And I'm just truly humbled at what I've been able to build. If you had asked me, as we talked about earlier, reflecting back on a decade ago, how much has changed, even for myself, if you told me a decade ago this is where I would be, I would probably laugh in your face. So I'm very proud of what I built and what I'm continuing to grow. What would you say, Ray?
Well, you kind of got me with this person saying you never be a good therapist. I'm like, oh, I really want to dig into that, but I know that could be very deep. But I come from a household of narcissism, and so the humility piece and the pride piece has been a really interesting thing to navigate. And like you, if somebody had told me in 1999, when I came out of the closet, that this many years down the road, I would have 2 queer podcasts, be known as like a coming out coach, and not like I'm famous, but there definitely is, there are people like, oh yeah, I know that guy. I know who he is. To see the impact I've been able to have, but the growth I've been able to see in myself, coming from a very militaristic, like, you need to accept me and this is the way it's going to be, and you need to take your freaking religion and shove it up your ass and all the, to, okay, I get why you choose to look at things through that lens. It makes you feel comfortable, it makes you feel protected, but I choose to look at life through this lens, to see the difference in myself from being Mr. Angry to still shows up. I'm not going to say, guys, that it doesn't, but to see that shift, that's some of the stuff I'm most proud of. Like, to embrace it. It's really hard sometimes for me to take a compliment. When somebody sends me a message and says, that was one of the best podcasts I've listened to, I'm so glad you did it, I love it, but it's kind of hard, and so there's that battle of humility and pride kind of playing out, because similar to you, I've had some people in my life that's like, who the hell do you think you are? Just because you've lived through this, you don't have a degree in this, da 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 da. And one of them is one of my my father. He's like, who do you think you are? Which has nothing to do with me. That has everything to do with him. Mm-hmm. And when I finally crossed that bridge, Will, and I could see that was a really beautiful moment of my own personal growth. So those are some of it's. As soon as you said humility and pride, I'm like, yeah, I feel that same pulse. Because it's a tough one. Yeah. And I hope that people who have listened to this conversation today for Pride, to kick off Pride. I mean, Will, you were the first one, buddy. I'm going to say it again, but I hope that each of you can embrace the pride of being who you are, but also the humility of how we got here and where we can go if we keep doing what we're doing and reflect back to who God helped us get here. There's so many layers of humility that I think can be really beautiful. And more than anything, just be kind to each other. I think right now our own community, from my perspective, needs to do a lot of internal introspection and start embracing each other a lot more than we currently do to really be in a beautiful, humble pride space. So maybe that's what we should put out there. What do you think, Will? Everybody be humble and proud and embrace each other for this pride season.
I think that's a really great idea. And one other little statement, if you don't mind if I share.
Absolutely.
I end every one of my drag shows with this, and I encourage anyone who's listening to start using it as well. You can trademark Ramona Mirage. It is allyship starts in seats but ends in the streets. So it starts by people sitting at drag events or listening to what we have to share and educate them on our experience, but it ends with them actually showing up in the streets, because people can say they're an ally, but if it doesn't end in the polling boxes or by protesting with us, it's not true allyship. And that's true for any community. So remind your friends and family that this season, because some people need a little refresher.
I love that. And I love that you shared your time. You were part of this. You helped us kick off Pride season. I hope everybody has an amazing season, however you spend it, whatever it looks like for you. Be careful out there. Love it. Celebrate, protest, whatever works in your world. Go out, be yourself, be what you're meant to be as an LGBTQ plus person out there in the world. And again, embrace each other with kindness. Even those that don't want to be kind to us, kindness goes a long way. Kindness and love is what's going to make all of this continue to grow and shift the world. So happy Pride, everyone. Thank you, Will. If somebody wants to learn more about you and your group, where's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, they can go to our website, headsheldhighcounseling.com. We also have a Facebook and Instagram that we're starting. So those are also the same, Heads Held High Counseling. Feel free to connect with me there. And I am always open to conversation, even if we don't serve your area. I'm always looking to support folks find queer, informed, and affordable care. I have a lot of networks in a lot of states, so don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to help and connect.
And if we want to experience Will in drag, your drag name is
Ramona Mirage, spelled just Ramona like it sounds. Okay. I am on a little bit of a hiatus, but I use those social medias more than I use my Will profile. So again, you can connect with me there too if you have any questions. Not looking for any drag kids, but I'm always open to a conversation nonetheless.
Conversation about it. Well, awesome. Well, again, thank you, Will, so much for being here, and happy Pride, everyone. And we will be back in just another week with another episode of Pride as we move on through Pride season. And be well, be good, and never stop stepping out, stepping up, and being your unapologetic self. Take care, everyone.
That's a wrap for 40 Plus. Gay men, gay talk, where size doesn't matter. We drop our bullshit, get over our screwed up fears, make bold moves, and live life without apologies. Don't forget to join us on Facebook at 40 Plus, Gay Men, Gay Talk, where the conversations continue.